Hello, welcome to Pulpit to Pew. I'm Johnny Gwin.
And I'm Beverly Gibson.
And this is the show that talks about the weekly sermon and the lessons and what the priest, that would be you, Beverly.
That's me.
What she was intending for me and the parishioners in the pews heard.
What actually got heard.
Right. And this was a big weekend this weekend at Christ Church Cathedral.
It was Rally Day. It's the first Sunday of the new program here. And it's always busy and lots of kids, lots of people who've been off doing different things in the summer. And the choir is back, and there's bigger choir and just more stuff going on.
It's programming all the things that would not be church, like service? Is it learning, classes?
Excellent question. I'm reminded by a mentor of mine that programming can become an idol.
Because you can worship the idol.
We can worship it in the church, and sometimes we do. Not to get off on a negative foot here, but it's kind of the consumer side of church life. Although, ideally speaking, it's about formation, so that it's Christian formation. We don't have what you and I grew up calling Sunday school, right, during the summertime. And we don't run our midweek programs during the summertime. After Labor Day, once everybody's back in the groove, we begin to do all those things again.
So let's go ahead and start with the sermon. But okay. I wanted to set the table for, Rally Day and what that means. Because I know the name, and I knew it was something I needed to pay attention to. Right. I want to know exactly what it was.
And that's a good question to begin with, Johnny, because it might be helpful for me to say at the very outset. Why was I so focused on actually a verse that was not in the reading, but it was actually in the daily office the week before in Psalm 37, verse 4.
And the daily office is?
If you read the daily office this week, and I very much hope that some of you do, the readings for the daily lectionary are listed in the back of the prayer book, and we've talked before about how this resource is available online. You can get an app for it for your phone. But I hope that you do it because the words and the prayers of that service keep us bound together when we're apart, when we're out living our lives in the world. But anyway, if you did read in the daily office this week on Thursday, then you read Psalm 37. And in it, the psalmist writes this: "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire." Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire. Your heart's desire. How do you know what that is? It's not the things that you desire. It's not your dream house or the car you want or your retirement that you hope for. It's not what we call our hopes and our dreams. It's the heart's desire. It's what rises up out of the depths within us in moments in time, and sometimes it can surprise us. It is our heart's longing. It is, in fact, our heart's longing answering a longing that God has for us. That is our heart's true desire.
Well, no, because I didn't know that the daily office was when I heard it. So I knew it was obviously something you read.
Right.
But it sounds like something in the back of the Book of Common Prayer, and it sets a daily regiment for prayer.
Right, for reading a prayer, and there's set prayers in the prayer book, and it's, for me, and this is what I said in the sermon, it's a way that we stay united in our prayers and in our life in Scripture, even when we're not together in the body, so that it's a comfort, really, and an encouragement to know that on a daily basis, there are Christians all around me, people in my congregation, people whom I love in the church, people whom I don't know and will never meet all over the world, who are reading the same Scripture I'm reading, and they're saying the same prayers I'm saying. And that makes me feel connected to the body, and also it gives me this sense of the prayers of the people rising up all over the place all the time. And that's really cool. But now I've deviated from the verse, which was delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire.
Right, which almost sounds like a wish, like a Disney wish.
It does. And I did a Johnny Gwin. I Googled it after I had used it, and I realized, oh, wow, there are people talking about this all over out there. And even Oprah, okay?
Really?
Oprah and Stephen Colbert talked about this verse. And then people talked about Oprah's interpretation as though she's somehow like the Talmud or something.
She sells lots of books.
She sure does. And I won't get into that because I resisted going down that rabbit hole.
Just confuse everything.
But where I started was with your heart's desire.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that? And how do you know it? Because it's very difficult to know. It's not the same as just the things we desire,
right,
or what we want in life. It's your heart's desire. It's your heart responding to the call of God to your heart.
Yeah, and you talked about I put a Beverly moment on this. Because you talked about when you found something that was your heart telling you wanted something, a calling from God, and a
very surprising one.
Yeah, and it was in your young adult life.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now I can give you an example. I can give you an example from a moment in my own life. It was a moment in my life now almost 25 years ago, and I hope that I never forget that one moment. I was walking up Pine Street Hill in Troy, Alabama, where we were living at the time. Now, Pine Street, you do need to know this, in Troy, connects two of the main residential streets, and it goes through a gully. And it went the way I was going from Orange Street, where we lived, down this steep hill and then back up a steep hill, up to Murphy Street and then College Street up above that. So on this day, I had gone down the hill, and now I was going up the hill, straight up. No one built anything there. There wasn't a place to do that, and so what was around me was really trees and rocks and the road and the hill, and that is all that I could see. And I was walking up that straight part, just me, and I remember very clearly right where I was when this thought rose up in me. I have no idea what I was thinking about around it, but all of a sudden I thought, I want to be in church. I want, not need, not should, not ought, but want. It was a desire. It was a feeling that just welled up in me. Now, I knew about the oughts and the shoulds, and I had plenty of people, then as now, around me to tell me about oughts and shoulds. I had then parents who could do that. I had friends who could do that. I even had my boss who would do that for me, to tell me what I should do. And that included going to church. Oddly, that was one of the first things my boss said on my first day of work. You should go to church. I grew up going to church. We went every Sunday. Came before church, went to Sunday school. We went to worship. Then we went home for a while. I came back Sunday evening. We did some more. I went home. One day during the week, I went to choir. Wednesday night, we went back. We did something else. We prayed some more. Then all of a sudden, it was Sunday again. We were back in church. And I did not do this unwillingly or unhappily. Those are fond memories, and I enjoyed it. I was around people that I loved, and I enjoyed what we did. But when I grew up and left home, I did not want to do that. And that was my choice. I did not. Now, that day on Pine Street Hill, I was a young adult. I was married. Mike and I had a home. We had a small child. I had a job that I very much enjoyed, doing something that I really cared about. I was working to finish my PhD. I was fairly busy. We had a full life. We had friends. We had things we did. Life was good. And it was pretty good, let me say, without church. That was not something that was on the radar for us. Going to church in that context, let me tell you, in a small town with a pretty nice-sized university in it, meant that I was going to church on Sunday with the people that I worked with and worked for the other days of the week. And I really did not want to go see them on Sunday morning. But I did. Because that day, I really wanted to go. Even though I had work that I could do on Sunday, even though I had other things that I could do on Sunday, all of a sudden I really wanted to go. And so the next Sunday I went. And I went the Sundays and even the Wednesdays and lots of other days after that. And the amazing thing was that even though all those people were there, Christ was there too. He was there with them and in them, and He met me there. And my life was transformed in ways that I never could have imagined. And so, from where I stand now, I ask myself, why do people go to church? I was teaching full-time at Troy University, and I was also in school full-time at Auburn University, finishing a PhD.
Yeah, with a new baby.
And I had a small child and a home and a husband. And I don't think we had a dog at that point in time.
Yeah.
But life was very full. And I had lots of things on my mind. I had lots of things to do. I needed every bit of every 24 hours in every day to work. And yet I wasn't miserable. I wasn't unhappy. I felt tremendously alive and engaged. And yet I had this moment, not out of despair, right, when all of a sudden something rose in my heart that said, I want this. I really want this. And
was it something was missing that you're drawn to that? Because it seems like you're filling every moment of the day with your life. Because you just said it's crazy. And then something like tickling you or pushing you to say, you need to like quiet. You need something that's not, even though because someone's heart desire might be, I want to be doing all these things I've wanted to do with a PhD and teaching and doing this and with the family and the kid. But then you have all that and you're like, wait, is that all there is? What is missing?
Right. And I guess in that way, I was already following my heart's desire because I was doing the things that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I think if I try to go back and recapture this, and I cannot totally recapture how I felt in the moment, and I probably wasn't that aware of it. Everything that I did was in my head.
It was like internal conversation.
Right? It was head. I mean, very intellectual.
Right.
And body, which was just getting things done. And so the heart piece was missing.
Right.
That spirit piece was not there.
So in your life, the head and the body was firing at all cylinders, but yet that heart thing was missing.
Just was not there.
It wasn't a on the road to Damascus moment, was it, that you had?
It wasn't like a lightning bolt conviction. It was just this very surprising thought. And as I also said in the sermon, I didn't elaborate, but the place where I ended up going to church, the place where I felt drawn, was not some place, for various reasons, I especially wanted to go.
But that was the church you knew.
Well, the church that I'd grown up in, I knew I didn't want to go back to that.
Okay.
And I knew they didn't want me. And I thought, well, this is a place I think I can go. But the congregation was almost totally comprised of people that I worked with and worked for.
Right. And that's one of the things that's why I don't want to go, because I get to know what these people do during the week.
And they're lovely people. Don't get me wrong.
I mean, right. But it's too much of anything is a bad thing sometimes.
So I'm going to go Sunday and hang out with you guys too, which I did. And it ended up being wonderful. And as I said in the sermon, what I discovered was that Christ was there. And
I like what you said about that. Yeah, Jesus met me at the church.
Right.
Yeah.
And in those people and in the sacraments and within myself, and totally turned my life around and transformed.
And we talk about that, and you go to almost any Pulpit View episode we have, we always talk about the transformation of church. But you can't just go through the motions. You have to have the deeper part to it, the heart part to it. If not, you're just checking off boxes on a list.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing either, because I think.
And so, from where I stand now, I ask myself, why do people go to church? There are plenty of other things to do. There are more things to do now than there were way back in the day. And many of them seem much more compelling and a lot more fun. So why are you here? Now, I know that plenty of you have very strong oughts and shoulds, and that is not bad. And I also understand the tremendous force of habit And that is not bad either. But in the final analysis, people come because they want to, because they have that desire, because there is something inside that wells up because God calls to it. And it rises up to meet God's calling desire.
I think that's especially true for us, Johnny, in liturgical worship, where you can go and the form just envelops you. And while on the one hand, people might say, well, it's not rising out of you spontaneously, but it's this church, the elaborate, beautiful architectural scheme of language and music and silence and space that allows all of these things to enter in. And there's always something new in that, always something rich. I was telling someone just yesterday, as many times as I have said and prayed the Eucharistic prayer, it's always new for me. There's always something in it that's new for me.
How does that start out? I'll know it once you start it.
Oh, that's when we get to the great Thanksgiving. The Lord be with you and also with you.
Right, okay.
Right. Well, and it begins always with this statement about God and creation and how God made us for this and we are here to receive it.
And the retelling of this Last Supper.
Right. And then you move into what's called the words of institution.
Okay.
Right. When Jesus sets the example, and those are unvarying. They're always the same. And then you come to the actual consecration moment, and then the fraction, which is the breaking of bread. And then that's offered to the people. And it's all, I may be talking, and there are places in there where the congregation speaks, but it's really all a prayer. And I'm talking just to focus our prayers. I'm just the one of us who happens to be talking. And, hold my hands out like this, which is, it looks like I'm going to catch a football, but that's
touchdown Jesus.
Right. That's not it. It's to say, it's like I'm capturing all the prayers in the room and offering those up and receiving the grace that comes in return. And that's just always such a revelation for me every time.
Is that a high point of the Mass for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing toward which our worship tends always.
Right. That's the peak of what we've been leading up to.
Right. I mean, we've come to be at the table together. Yeah. Christ is at the table with us. He welcomes us to the table and he feeds us there. And so it's constantly new. But the other thing in church, and this kind of takes us back to what we're saying about the program year. And I remember this from being a newcomer from that time in my life that we're talking about. The tendency is, and you've done this, we've all done this, you come in and you sit in the back so that you can get out fast. And so nobody really notices you. You hope, of course, they do notice you. But the aim is to get in there, to kind of have the experience of worship, and then to get out and not get trapped. And people are good at that, by the way. I mean, people can run so fast. And I understand that. That's a natural tendency of the person who's just kind of testing this out and is a bit uncertain. But in order really to have that experience, you have to really be with the other people who are there, because that's really the way you meet Christ is through those people. And you meet them in a way that you don't meet them in other places. I mean, we may have talked about this one time when Brene Brown spoke at the National Cathedral at some point earlier in this year. One of the things that she lauded about being an Episcopalian, she didn't really laud it. She said, this is what is important to me. He said, I go to church and I pray and I go to the rail with people who are not like me and with whom I deeply disagree.
Right, except for that time.
But we are together in our prayers, and we're together at the rail, and that unites us. And that's really important to me.
And that really gets into the heart of things, because head and body can do lots of weird things together. But
now, when Jesus went into the region of Tyre, as we heard him doing today, he was not going there to carry out his mission and his ministry. He was not going there to work or to do what he was already doing. His mission was with the lost sheep of Israel, with his own people. with God's chosen people, and they were not present in this place that he went. And Mark tells us that Jesus did not want anyone to know that he was there. And so he went into a house. He was basically hiding. He'd gone away in order to be away. And yet the news traveled. And a Gentile woman whose daughter was afflicted with an unclean spirit heard that Jesus was there because news travels. And her desire to appeal to him was strong. And so she came, she found him, and she bowed down at his feet, and she begged him to help her daughter. And the response that Jesus gave her was not, I imagine, what she had hoped for. And it is not what we expect to hear Jesus say, ever. Jesus said something harsh and very strong. He said, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. The food, the bread come down from heaven in the person of Jesus, is for the children of Israel and not for this woman who is a Gentile. And Jesus used the common language of prejudice, and it's shocking when we hear it. It was shocking then, it's shocking now, calling those outside the chosen people dogs. But the woman...
But sometimes intelligence gets in the way of very simple feelings.
Well, and also I think, especially in our present climate, fundamental philosophical disagreement, ideological disagreements, we somehow have tricked ourselves into thinking those are insurmountable and that they create a wall between us and other people, and therefore we should have nothing to do with those people because they're just wrong and they're going to keep being wrong and we can't really be in relationship with them. And that's your head taking you on a trip. Mm-hmm. What the experience we're talking about brings you to realize is in a heart way, we are all struggling with the same things in varying ways. And it brings you to a compassionate place with other people, or it should, in confronting your own failure, because we do say the confession every time we're together. I've failed. Everybody in this room has failed. We've all fallen short of what we were supposed to do. We've done things we shouldn't have done. We're all broken. We all have some pain. And that unites us.
Right.
And we do the things we do for reasons quite often we're unaware of, and that we believe we have no control over. And no matter which way we're doing those things, we've still come to express our praise and our love for the same God who loves us all in the same way.
And that idea goes right into the gospel this week when you had Jesus, which, by the way, the world's worst hide and seek person.
Yeah, he's
terrible at it.
He's the worst vacationer ever.
He literally escapes to a part of the world where there are no Jewish people in Tyre, right? Well, not a lot of his flock is there. Mm-hmm. And he goes to get away from things. And yet, people hear he's there and they come a running to the Gentiles. And there's a very strong woman, which these strong women really put him on his back with some negotiation skills.
She was determined.
Mm-hmm. So you had this moment where not of Jesus we hear a whole lot about, because she asked Jesus to heal her daughter that might be filled like a demon, or might be possessed by a demon. Mm-hmm. And I drew the picture of his hand in her face, no,
that's a good
stay
picture.
Back, and then
she's bowing down in front of him.
Yeah. And then she's begging, and then, he gives almost a rhetorical question of, no, I don't feel like that. I'm tired is what I kind of get out of that. That's my idea of that. Mm-hmm. But then he says, roughly to the point of, if your child has to eat, why would you why would you take that food and feed to the dogs? Mm-hmm. Which in this a Gentile, she's a Gentile,
right?
She's a dog. And I know that's a trigger for us now,
it was a trigger then too.
Pretty bad. But that's not a Jesus that we think of a lot because of that language.
Yeah, it kind of gives the lie to that, what would Jesus do kind of thing,
yeah, that's
doesn't it? Mm-hmm.
But then I then ask the question is is this Jesus being the human part of Jesus that we all do when we're tired and make a comment of like, just leave me alone? Or is it that test Jesus that's like pushing her to see how faithful she is?
Well, I do think it is the test Jesus in a couple of different ways. It is also something really to think about in terms of his mission and ministry. And part of this is it may be remember, you've got someone writing a gospel after the fact, but not incredibly long after the fact. His mission was not to the Gentiles.
Right. It was the flock, the Jewish people.
It was to the lost sheep of Israel. And so part of the reason, supposedly, that he's gone out into this Gentile area is to get away from his mission itself. So he had not come there to proclaim the gospel or to heal people. And yet, people came.
Yeah.
And what he expressed to her when he said the children, he meant the children
Jewish
of
people.
Israel.
Yeah, the Jewish people.
That it is not right to give the food, right, the bread of heaven come down in the person of Jesus Christ. It is not right to give this food to the dogs, right, when the children have to be fed first.
Yeah.
And the real, the story.
There's that thinking different of, it's like I'm thinking different of different people who aren't like me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a statement of bold prejudice, right?
Yeah.
And we see it, we hear it.
Yeah.
It's in the world. It startles us to see it emerging in the gospel. And yet, what she does is not to get defensive and not to get angry. She's just really smart, and she's really good with language. And she takes that metaphor. She takes that children and dogs, and she says, and yet, even the dogs underneath the table, right, are entitled, right, to what the children drop on the floor.
Yeah.
And Jesus sort of looks at her, it's like, you got it, right? And she does the same thing rhetorically that he does all the time in verbal combat with the Jewish authorities. She's got him. And he says, for saying that, your daughter is healed.
Well, I think it's interesting because if Jesus can change his
But the
mind,
woman was undeterred by that because her desire was very strong. And that was coupled with a real ability to use the language well. Very impressive technique, because what she does is to turn Jesus' own way right back on him. And she says, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Now, while everyone knows that it would be wrong to take food that's meant for the children and give it to the dogs, everyone also knows that the dogs in the household are perfectly well entitled to what the children drop from the table. In fact, in most households, that's a good thing that the dog is there. And the dog is permitted to eat what falls from the table. And Jesus acknowledges this woman's words by what he says next. And he acknowledges that her words have actually overthrown what he said. She's used his same technique, and she's done it well. And so he tells her that for saying what she did, her daughter is healed and freed from the demon. But perhaps that isn't the real miracle. Perhaps the real miracle has happened in that overcoming of obstacle, in the overcoming of prejudice, in the overcoming of the boundaries that divide people and make some people in and other people out. Maybe the miracle happened in receiving and claiming the heart's desire. And Jesus did not come into Gentile territory to do miracles or to incorporate the Gentiles, and yet it kept happening. It kept happening. As he went his way, making his way back through the region of the Decapolis, people brought to him a man who had impaired hearing and impaired speech. And they begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. And Jesus took the man apart from the crowd, and he touched the man's ear, and he touched his tongue, And he spoke in the man's own language, and he said, "Be opened." And the man could hear, and he could speak clearly. Hearing and speech are both at the center of the gospel lesson today. They're at the heart of the gospel. Truly hearing clearly, understanding, is what Jesus asked for, looked for, and what he asked and asks people to do. That understanding is demonstrated, it's conveyed through our speech, through the words that we say all the time, and through what we do, through what we say and what we do, every moment of every day. Our reading from the letter of James focuses on the congruence of faith and work, of understanding and expression, and sometimes this passage is used to separate faith and works, to say that works is better, that faith alone is dead. And no doubt James is responding, some scholars say, to what Paul has said in the letter to the Romans. But the verse that follows our passage today is an important one. And it says this: after the end of the passage, which says, "So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead," comes this: "But some will say, you have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith." Faith, the heart's desire, that thing that God has given us, that thing that rises up in us, that delights in and brings delight to the Lord, blossoms in our work, in our living, in what we do every day.
I think going back to that, what does my heart desire? Sometimes we don't have that. I have cancer. I have this. It is like, man, my life's pretty good. What do I really want? And what are you asking me to be a part of that fills that kind of that hole we talked about, that hole in our life?
And that's part of what we're saying, and that's part of what I was trying to pose as something for thought in the sermon. By and large, in contemporary American life, where we're living right now, the people who would be sitting in the pews at Christ Church on Sunday morning, yes, we all have struggles. There are people who are ill, their loved ones are ill. There are people whose marriages are broken. There are people going through divorce. There are people having problems with their children.
And that's rich and poor.
Right, and that's rich and poor. That's always there. And yet, mostly, even though those things are happening for us, we are not in desperation. Right? We're not, most of the time, at that point of utter despair. And, back to my example of myself, I was not in despair. And when you're not, when life is so full and when there's so much to choose from, and that's the world we live in right now, it seems even harder to know your heart's desire, because it's so easy to just fill everything all the time. And I know this is your line of work, but consumer culture and the consumer mentality, and that's nothing new either, drives us further away from our heart's desire teasing us into different ways. And there you have, and I don't mean to diverge into this, although this is something much on my mind here lately, the traditional ways of keeping the Sabbath were meant to remove those obstructions. Mm-hmm. And we don't really keep Sabbath anymore. And so it's so much harder, I think, for us to come to that listening place. Yeah. To that place where we're able to really feel the movement of the heart's desire. And
that goes to the second part of the gospel with Jesus, another Gentile, a man who's brought to him who can't speak and can't hear.
Right. Has an impediment.
And he heals puts his finger in his ear, holds his tongue. Yeah. Which goes to again, a beautiful alliteration of hearing clearly and then speaking clearly, which goes into you have to hear clear to know what your heart wants, and then you have to express what your heart wants.
Right. Be opened, Jesus says. Yeah.
And that's be open to new ideas and to new things. And again, there's not an episode we don't talk about that. Every one of these episodes. I love that 2 lines, be opened.
Right.
Well,
and to go back to your wonderful observation about my story, if I want to try to unpack that, there I am as a young adult, like so many young adults, just driving forward as hard as I can go to do the things that I know I have to do in order to accomplish what I really am impelled to accomplish. And in the process of doing that, I'm closing myself off. I'm closing off that heart place. I'm getting more closed instead of more open.
Well, you distribute the attention.
Right.
With your life and hobbies and everything. I mean, maybe that moment hit you because you were walking up a hill and there wasn't a lot of stimulus. Like you said, it was a part of the city where there was nothing built. It was in nature. I mean, the poem you spoke of in the last part of the your sermon talked about the things of nature, dragonflies and all these things where this expression of beauty is all in these very simple things.
Right. And that particular poem, it's when Kingfishers Catch Fire by Gerard Manley Hopkins. He's conveying
one of the most beautiful expressions I know of about this is in a poem by a Jesuit priest, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it's not long, and I'll try to express it clearly, and you try to hear it clearly. Kingfishers catch fire, and dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim and rounding wells, stones ring, like each tucked string tells. Each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out abroad its name. Each mortal thing does one and the same. Deals out that being indoors, each one dwells. Selves, goes itself. Myself, it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me. For that I came. I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace. That keeps all his goings graces. Acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes, not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. Kingfishers and dragonflies do their work. They do the thing God created them to do, and in doing it, beauty flashes out. And we are made also to express our heart's desire, to express what we were made to do. God's desire in our daily living. Hopkins writes that when we do this, in all those places we go, Christ is playing in those 10,000 places. We see him in the faces that we meet, and we express him in our own work. But we have to bring our heart into play. We have to let the heart's desire rise up in us and be known.
Right. And that particular poem, it's when Kingfishers Catch Fire by Gerard Manley Hopkins. He's conveying that congruence between being and acting. We read the letter of James talking about faith and work. Or faith and works, deeds. And what Hopkins is drawing out there is in God's creation, those things, one should blossom from the other. There's not a separation between them. When kingfishers are doing what kingfishers do, they catch fire. They're beautiful. Dragonflies are out there doing what God made them to do, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And in the second part of the poem, he moves toward human beings and says, this is even more, right, for us. The just man justices, right? And then he moves toward Christ.
Right.
and says that when we do that in the world, when there is that congruence between our faith and our expression and our work, what we do, then Christ is there. And there's that wonderful line, Christ plays in 10,000 places. Mm-hmm. And that sense of those things not being separate, but flowering out, one out of the other.
And it sounds like it's contagious too. Like your expression on your face and your actions is seen, that's the expression of God if you're doing it right. And then others may do that as well because it's just a natural kind of domino effect because of that. It's almost like your heart, and when your heart and your head align, nothing is impossible. Or seems, few things are, I mean, it's just more powerful to align your head and your heart together.
And the idea that we're talking about is when that happens, then the openness of the heart allows God to flow in and out of that. That it is, and I think I said this in the sermon, the heart's desire is implanted in us by God, and our openness and allowing that to come forward meets God's desire for us. Mm-hmm. And that's the real flourishing of human life and of the world. And that sounds terribly idealistic and pie in the sky, but I think we all know there's truth in that.
Sure.
I mean, we felt it before.
Well, I mean, I'll go to the world of branding that we talk about.
In us and be known. Now, I'm going to be honest with you about some of my feelings this week. If you look in your bulletin, and I'll ask you to at the announcements, at all the Christian formation and all the stuff we're doing, I did say to the people around me, this looks like works righteousness to me. And without heart, that's what it could be. But it has come directly from the expressions shared with each other over the last year and a half of listening. And so my hope and my prayer is that in worship and in music and in formation, everyone here and not here around us finds some moment, some sacred time in the midst of that when your heart's desire rises and meets God's desire for you. Amen.
Sure. I mean, we felt it before.
Well, I mean, I'll go to the world of branding that we talk about when your mission aligns with your products and truly aligns with what your core values are. Well, that's a truth. And there you go. There is your company, and it's going to thrive or not based on the value of those things. But you've nailed the three things that have to, you can't say you're one thing and do another. When you align all those things together, that company, when everybody buys in, is almost unstoppable. So, it's that Venn diagram thing, right? Right. You, God, the world, right. Put it together in that little middle section is that the heart of, things you're hearing, what you're wanting to do, and then how you're expressing it to the world. Did we just finish that?
We're done now.
We're done.
Yeah.
We're totally done. It was really good because it's a simple line too. You're hearing clearly, you're speaking clearly, and you're expressing that to others in what God has called you to do.
And that first step is the hardest. Mm-hmm. Truly to know the heart's desire is the hardest part.
And it might hit you on the street in Dothan, Alabama.
In Troy, Alabama.
Troy, Alabama. Sorry.
It might. Yeah. It might hit you anywhere. It could. Well, the grocery store, maybe not.
Talk about distractions.
Distractions. But you have to make the time and the space for that. And obviously, I had taken myself completely away from, and this is in the days before iPods and podcasts.
Right.
And so I didn't have anything in my ears. I wasn't listening to something else. I was free of other people, free of distraction, it was just me and my feet and the hill and whatever was in my heart. Yeah. You have to put yourself in a place like that somehow or other.
So we're going to end today's episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Pulpit to Pew. And please subscribe on iTunes if this is your first time listening, or share it with a friend. And we're also on YouTube. You can search us on Google. We're pretty much just hard not to find us. And Christchurch. I always get the website wrong. So pulpittopew.com is our website, but the Christchurch Cathedral website is
ChristchurchCathedralMobile.org.
There you go. And you can visit us. I don't know if there's any Pulpit to Pew stuff on there, but you can find all kind of stuff on there.
You can link from there.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, everybody, have a great week, and thanks for listening. I'm Johnny Gwin.
And I'm Beverly Gibson.
And Beverly will end on your final word.
Amen.
If you'd like to know more about Beverly Gibson and Christ Church Cathedral, please visit christchurchcathedralmobile.org. There you'll find information on the church, Reverend Beverly Gibson's recorded sermons, and sermon notes. If you want to know more about Johnny and his Sabbath doodles, visit pulpittopew.com. I would also like to thank Deep Fried Studios and producer Stacy Wellborn. Without her, this show would not get made. If you have any comments, likes, dislikes, please send information to Stacy at deepfriedstudios.com. Everyone have a great day, and thanks for listening.